Hi, folks. I'm Marc Silber. I'm a photographer, author, and educator in Carmel, California. And if you know me, you know I love to talk about photography with great photographers. Today, our guest is our good friend Dan Milnor, who, believe it or not, started off as a fragrance model. We'll have to ask him about that sometime, a hot tub installer, but is also better known as a reformed journalist photographer and who fulfills those roles with Blurb as their evangelist. We're going to have a discussion with Dan about his views on photography. Welcome to our show, Dan. Dan, it is awesome to have you back on the show behind that fancy camera you got there.
I'm happy to be here. I love you. I haven't seen you in a long time, and we're old buds, man. I see your emails, I think about you, and I always have a warm feeling when I see your name in my inbox.
Likewise. And I'm glad we're getting together through the magic of the modern technology. You're in Sag Harbor, I'm in Carmel. We're what, 3,000 miles apart, and yet here we are having this discussion. How cool is that?
I know. It's just, I love doing this stuff. It's just an endless amount of conversations we can have, conversations that we should be having, especially about things like what we're talking about today, which is actual imagery.
Yes. Composition.
Yeah, I'm all for it. Composition.
Okay, well, let's just dive in then. So when you're teaching, like you do a lot of workshops, so what do you tell students, or how do you direct them, or how do you improve their composition?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think composition is what I would say is in the ranking hierarchy of imagery. To me, it's ranks in third place, and that doesn't mean that it's third in terms of importance. It's third in terms of sort of what I look for before. So there's two things before composition: light and timing. Those are the first two things that I'm looking for, and I'm suggesting that people are looking for, which is number one, trying to find the best available light that you have and working only in that light. And then because I was a photojournalism guy and sort of come from the reality-based photography world, I'm very much involved in the timing of real life moments, things that happen in one frame, two frame moments, and then they're gone forever. That's not set up, not something that you can stand in one place with the camera at arm's length and shoot frame after frame after frame. I'm not so interested in that. I'm looking for the one-off, one in a million kind of shots. And then the third part of the equation is composition. And to me, composition is where you become an individual as a photographer, because I don't really see there's much of a right and wrong when it comes to composition. I think it's as unique as your fingerprint. It's how you see the world. And if you look through history, there's successful photographers who have incredibly simplistic composition, but their lighting is impeccable and the whole thing works. And then you have other people who have incredibly visually sophisticated composition that you can recognize from across the room and say, I know who shot that. And that's really what we're after with composition, is we're after a recognizable identity as a photographer. And the other thing that I tell students too is learning your composition can take a long, long time. It took me almost 10 years to figure it out. And I was working every day as a photographer, and it still took me 10 years, but I was shooting a lot of pictures for other people. I was on assignment. I was, doing newspaper assignments and magazine assignments and commercial assignments. And often in those situations, you're not necessarily granted the freedom to make your own work. And so you have to be crafty about how you sneak that in there. But once I was left to my own devices and I quit doing that kind of work and just focused on my own work, it was then that I figured out, like, I'm basically a 35 millimeter lens and film format, analog documentary photographer. That was kind of a relief for me to figure that out back in a long time ago, back in probably 99, 2000, somewhere around there. I was like, oh, that's kind of who I am. And the composition was really apparent when you looked at the work.
Yeah. We've talked about this before, but there's nothing like that discipline of, the imagery through a single lens, 35 millimeter or medium format, either one, and
Yeah.
just getting it down, so you're not changing your formats all the time, which also changes your composition, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I was a two camera, two lens guy because I was traveling and doing work, and it's not really professional to get on a plane on somebody else's dime with a single camera. That's like an irresponsible thing to
Yeah.
do, in my opinion, because every camera I've ever had breaks at some point in time, and so you had to have two, and I didn't want to change film all the time, and oftentimes you're shooting things that are happening so quickly, you needed two bodies at all times to be firing.
Yeah.
But as I get older and as I sort of get more refined, but also as I lose that ability to spend that kind of time shooting, I've actually gotten even more and more simplified when it comes to the gear. I just spent 2 weeks in Albania and I shot one lens and one body the entire time. I took a second lens and I forced myself to use it one day, and I didn't use it. I was like, I don't want to look through this lens. And it was a 35. And typically I shot that lens for 25 years, but I'm a 50 guy now. So I shot the 50 for 2 weeks straight in Albania. And and then one of my students, a guy out of the UK named Tony Goldstone, who's a really good photographer. He's very good. He was using the Fuji X100, and that's a camera that I've owned two of, and I never made a single decent photo with that camera. I don't know why. I never jived with that camera, but looking at Tony's work, I was like, oh, that camera's even smaller. It's smaller than my XH2 and, my little 1.4 50 millimeter lens. And I was like, wow, if I got an X100, I could even reduce my camera size. But, to me, it's so much fun to be in the field now because I don't get the opportunity to do it all that much. And I don't want to carry too much, and I don't want to think about equipment at all. I just want to look at the world because it is a moving tapestry that is an endless opportunity. And I just want to frame it up and shoot it. And I just want the simplest thing possible.
To that I say amen, brother, because that really, isn't that why we love photography? Because it really affords you this opportunity to really look at the world.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. There are times when I wish I wasn't so motivated by like looking at everything through a box.
Yeah.
There are times, and your friends and family are around you. Why do you have your backpack? We're going to dinner. Why are you carrying a backpack?
Why do we have to stop here?
Yeah, they look at you and they're like, you're not going to take that, are you? You're not going to carry that with you, are you? You're not taking your camera with you. And you're like, yeah, I am. I don't go anywhere without it. I use it all the time. And, you have to get over it. And there are times when, I'm traveling and you're at the maximum carry-on capacity and you're skimping on other things that you should be taking because you're jamming in some other piece of equipment that you want to take. And, I see these these young photographers with their little X100s getting on the plane. And I'm like, oh man, that's just so simple. Because for years, up until very recently, when I would go on a blurb trip, I had a full Canon digital system. So full frame digital system. I had a Polaroid system. I had my Hasselblad and a lens. And I had my Leica and two lenses, and I would shoot all of that on these blurb trips. And I would produce work throughout the blurb trips, whether it was Australia, Europe, Canada, the US. I would go and I would compile work with all these systems. And then blurb would actually wait for this stuff. They would wait for the film to come back and wait for it to get scanned and wait for it to get FTP'd. And then we would start utilizing that work. And that ship really sailed. Nobody's really, and it's not like blurb puts pressure on me to shoot digital, but it's just that the logistics of film and the complexity of using four systems at one time, it just doesn't work anymore for me. And I'm getting older. So I'm like the wildebeest that's wandering close to the croc-infested river. I'm waiting to be taken down at some point.
Okay. So we talked about your advice, the top 3 things. I love that. Do you want to leave viewers with any particular point of advice in terms of improving their game, in photography?
Yeah, I think I would give advice to the kind of folks who share a similar love of the kind of photography that I do. Some would call it street photography, even though I'm not really a street photographer, but let's just say documentary photography. I think Number one, add people to your work. If you're not a people photographer, add them in. Doesn't matter if they're people you know or people you don't know. But the last thing I'll say, and I'll steal something from Kappa here, which is just to get close, to get really close. And I think that first layer, that first level of your foreground, it can literally be, up, very, very close as a first level, because you're looking for foreground, midground, and background, all working in the same frame with consistent, good, dramatic light throughout the scene, combined with an actual moment where the pieces on the chessboard are all moving. And that moment only exists in one frame. That's what we're looking for. But get that first first layer up very close.
I love it. Bob Kappa, if your photographs are not good enough, you're not close enough.
That's right.
Dan, thanks for joining us again. And please, let's not wait so long between our next episode. In fact, we're going to have one right away.
I'll talk to you anytime.
All right, brother. Okay, thanks again. As always, talking to Dan is absolutely a great experience, and I hope you took notes so you can go out and put those points to use. One thing I want to invite you to do is get my free download of my composition field guide. You can take this and put it in your phone and carry it around with you as you're photographing as reminders. It's got 15 different compositional tools that you should put to use. You can find that right up here and in the description. So grab that and put it to use. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our new episodes, and enable the bell. Leave your comments. I love to hear from you. And please share this video with others. And until next time, remember to get out and capture your own images of life.